KO.
Black is beautiful. Yes, it is. Black is beautiful. Black is beautiful. Yes, it is. Black is beautiful. Come on.
No justice, no peace. I'm Kalia,
I'm Italia.
And I'm Sierra.
and welcome to The Take.
In yesterday's episode, we spoke with Dr. Carrie Olson and Ms. Carolina Villagrana about their dedication to community and teacher representation on the DPS school board, as well as why they make great candidates.
I really liked being able to hear the issues and tasks that were important to them and how they plan to operate on the school board upon being elected. What about you, Sierra?
No, I really loved hearing from our candidates and about what they believe are issues around the school and the issues that they feel like need to be reformed in DPS. It was really good to hear about their involvement in their community in their schools.
So with that being said, I'm sure y'all are wondering what's up this week. In today's episode, we're going to be talking to some of our school board candidates and see why they want to be on the board, what changes and improvements they want to make to DPS, and their commitment to the education of DPS students.
Welcome and thank you for joining us on The Take. Before we get started, we have to remind our listeners about the trigger alert. Sierra, can you please read the trigger alert?
If you are not 110% in support of Black Lives Matter, please dismiss yourself. If you are in any sorts of agreement with the systemic oppressions in this country has inflicted on minorities, once again, please dismiss yourself. And if you are not willing to give every single bit of power that the people so undeniably deserve, then please dismiss yourself. Because in a few moments, you will witness the thoughts, facts, and feelings that we are about to share, and they will most definitely dismiss you. Okay, so let's get into it. Today we have with us Vernon Jones, running for District at Large, Mike DeGuire, running for District 3, and Scott Esserman, running for District at Large. Thank you so much for being with us today. Before we get started, can each of you provide our listeners with some information about yourself to include what motivates you to want to become a board member?
Well, good afternoon to all of you amazing people, the queens of the far Northeast. Thank you guys for having us on today. One of the things that motivates me, I'm Vernon Jones Jr. One of the things that motivates me to run for the school board is, one, I always like to talk about the good in our hood, and it doesn't get elevated enough. Like, we know, living out in the far Northeast, living out in Green Valley Ranch, Montbello, we hear so many other stories about us, but we don't hear about our greatness. We don't hear about the great things that happen every day in our classroom. So I'm excited about that. Being a kid that that was raised in Denver, being able to give back and serve in a way that ensures that students are getting the education that they deserve, that they are learning the history that they should be learning, that they are getting the opportunities that they should be getting the opportunities for. So I'm excited. I'm excited to get in the conversation with you guys today. So you can learn more about our campaign at Vernon at jonesfordenver.com. But I'm ready to get talking.
Good afternoon. I am honored to be here today. I can remember when I was at a board meeting when Dr. Grayson brought down students to talk about their experience, some of you, in fact, talking about your experience visiting the National Museum for African American History in Washington, D.C., and that driving where we are now with the No Justice, No Peace resolution and your ongoing work in the podcast. And I'm honored to be here, quite honestly, with you. My name is Scott Esserman. I'm running for Denver Public Schools Board at Large. And there are a bunch of reasons. Let's get to the primary ones. One is I'm a parent. I have two children. I have a daughter who graduated from Manual High School last year, and I have a son who's an 8th grader at DSST Montview. And I tend to express my pride in my daughter a little bit more than my son. So I'm working on really expressing my pride about him as well. I love being a dad. And more importantly, I've loved being involved in their schools. I come to this because I taught for 20 years. I taught private and public. I taught middle and high school. I taught a lot of different classes and a lot of different students. And most recently, I opened Northfield High School. I wrote the innovation plan for it and designated that school, I think, relevant to when we're talking about systemic oppression and when we're talking about Black Lives Matter. We wrote that innovation plan specifically to make Northfield High School an international baccalaureate for all students school. Far too often, we see our students, in particular our Black students, denied the opportunities and the access to the curricula that are going to ensure their success and ensure your success. And I know that Dr. Grayson does a remarkable job up there ensuring your success. And that has to happen everywhere, and that has to happen system-wide. And that's one of the primary reasons that I'm running. I can go on for a long time, but I'm not going to, because I know we got a lot of other people to hear from, and I got a lot of other things to say. But thank you for having me here.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for this opportunity to be here. I'm Mike DeGuire, and I'm running for District 3 for the school board, and I'm really excited to see everyone on this panel. I had a chance to meet your principal through the Zoom process when we were working behind the scenes, forming the Denver School Leaders Association. I was the former president of the Denver Association of School Administrators and worked with Dr. Grayson and several other principals to form the DSLA because the voices of school leaders and students and employees in the district were not being heard. It was a wonderful experience. I am a parent of 4 children, 4 grandchildren. My daughter is a counselor at DCIS Baker, and my youngest grandson is a student at Brown International. I've been a principal for 28 years. The last 12, I was a principal at McMean Elementary in Southeast Denver, and I had a chance to work with a wonderful team of teachers, 5 of whom are still current principals right now in Denver. Several others have become leaders in Denver, and I'm very proud of the mentoring that I've been able to do with them, as well as the coaching I've been able to do with a number of principals for the last 9 years since I retired. My main reasons for running for the board are because I believe very strongly that we need to do things very differently with how we're educating our students. Your voice that you've shown in the past year is just an example of how important we need to hear from students like you, as well as the leaders in the schools who know what really needs to be happening inside the school classrooms. We need to have more funding for the schools. We need to make sure that we're not measuring students based on standardized tests. We need to make sure that your voice and your needs in terms of how you learn are honored every day. And I'm really glad to be here and looking forward to this conversation. Thank you so much.
I love how all of your answers pretty much tie into your personal experiences. And I love how you guys want to center things around student achievement within Black and Brown students. So for the first question, in the order of Mr. Esserman, Mr. Jones, and Mr. DeGuire, what do you see as your roles and responsibilities on the board? And what do you believe is the most important responsibility of a board member?
Thanks. That's an excellent question. And what I would say is, I know what my roles and responsibilities on the board are, and they are to, number one, to supervise the board's only employee, the superintendent. And that's a big supervision, because it is the superintendent's responsibility as given by the board to ensure that all of our students are learning. That's the most important responsibility for me as a board member, is that every student has to graduate fulfilling the promise of our public education, prepared for their next steps in life. And that means if they're prepared for college, they're prepared for an occupation. They're prepared to do an apprenticeship with the union. They're prepared for studying culinary arts. They're prepared for, you name it. And that's our primary responsibility. As board, we also have some fiscal oversight to ensure that the dollars are reaching our students. We have some ability to ensure that when there are disparities in education, as there have been for far too long, that we are addressing those, that we aren't satisfied with a 2% increase in Black graduation rates or a 4% increase over 10 years, that if we establish the next iteration, which I think is our responsibility in terms of visioning of what the next long-term plan for Denver public schools look like, that we actually try to make it happen. The last plan, the 2020 plan, you can look at lofty goals, that we're promising and a failure to reach them. And so we have a responsibility as a board to ensure that happens. We have a responsibility as a board to create a vision that incorporates student voice, that incorporates community voice. I think we owe it to our communities to stop acting upon them and instead act with them, to be involved with community-led and district-supported efforts. And that's a huge piece that's missing.
Excellent. So the board's responsibility, definitely the superintendent, and we also have a general counsel that the board hires. But I think again, 162 years is how long Denver Public Schools has existed, right? And so for 162 years, we have been supposed to educate all children, right? And we understand that by design, that does not happen, right? So primarily what the board is responsible for is to ensure that when we cast a vision of all children, that the superintendent is mobilizing his or her staff to ensure that we are really serving all children well. My mother grew up in Denver Public Schools from the 60s. She went all the way through and became a teacher, an administrator, and she will tell you that the same struggles that she had in the 60s, 70s, and 80s are the very same struggles that you young ladies have been fighting against today. And there's no way that that's okay. There's no way that that's acceptable. So we have to be a board that steps into the space and says, we're not going to make bold commitments like the Black Excellence Resolution and not deliver on them. We're not going to have judges come down with a consent decree and not deliver on them. Our job as a board is to make sure that the promises that we make to students, to family, and staff, that we keep those promises, because for far too long, those promises have not been kept. And for far too long, those unkept promises have caused so much pain in our communities, and we're tired of that. So the job of the board is to make sure we see a new day in Denver Public Schools.
Yeah. My responsibility as a board member is to work with the other board colleagues to make sure that we have the right vision and policies in place, be sure that we can change the current situation for all our students. Too many of our Black and brown students are not succeeding, but they're also not experiencing quality learning experiences in school. This is a key. They're not engaged. When I talk with superintendents across the northwest part of the state with my new job with CDA, I hear that yes, we have academics happening, but we don't have engagement. We don't have meaningful learning experiences for kids from all different backgrounds. And I can't stress enough the importance of changing how we're delivering education. Part of the problem is the way we're measuring it. The primary way that we measure student achievement right now is based on a standardized test, and that's wrong. The standardized tests do not tell us the full picture of a student's learning, nor the full picture of their experiences. As a board member, it's critical that I would work with my colleagues to make sure that the superintendent is accountable to enacting processes, policies, and procedures that will make sure that every student can be engaged fully in their learning, but also that teachers and school leaders are respected for the work that they do. Too much of what's happening in Denver is happening at the top level down. We need to empower our school leaders and our school teachers to know that they're trusted and respected for what they're doing and not evaluated for minutia and for data that is not relevant to the overall learning experiences for kids. Student voice is critical. We need to continue to hear the student voice. Times have changed. The pandemic has taught us that we need to focus on mental health, social and emotional health along with learning, not just as a separate 20-minute time period. And I really think there's a lot that we can do with a new board.
Thank you. And I just love how all of your answers not only connected to your own experiences, your family's experiences, your children's experiences, your community's experience, but I also love how all of the things that you care about and the things that you see as your responsibilities on the board are things that really affect everybody. And speaking of that, because I heard one of you guys mention the pandemic, I specifically want to ask you, Mr. Jones, during the pandemic, a lot of students, specifically Black and brown students, suffered from a lot of trauma, being at home, witnessing events out in the world. And I just want to ask you, what supports would you have put in place for students and staff during the process of coming back into this new school year?
Amazing question. And you, we entered the pandemic as a family, having gone through some real serious traumas personally, and then the pandemic, right? Being at home, constantly, y'all know how it is, being at home constantly with your brothers and sisters, constantly with your parents, nowhere to breathe. And, you know, I was serving food to folks in our community at very different school sites with DPS. And I saw folks coming to those food lines who I was just at their house for a barbecue months ago, right? And because of their lost jobs, because of, you know, the volume had been at mom's place had been cut down, they weren't making the same amount of money. So they were in a place of need. We needed to, as Dr. Mike was saying, we need to ensure that wellness is a baseline expectation. This is what I say in my campaign. Wellness has got to be a baseline expectation. It can't be an afterthought. It has to be at the forefront of our thinking. We need to make sure that we've got places where we've got great sensory rooms. We got to make sure that we've got a great counselor to student ratio. I mean, right now it is not manageable. I mean, you talk about meeting the needs of all students. There's no way. And you guys have a great counseling team at DMLK. But when you look at the ratio, there's no way they can meet all the needs of every student in that building with the level of trauma that we've all experienced over this pandemic. So I would have inundated our schools with more partnerships, more resources with, you know, Denver Mental Health. I would have made sure that we had, to Dr. Mike's point again, infused wellness into all of our courses, not just another add-on, but to make sure that we're like, hey, let's take time to heal, right? Let's take time to heal rather than continue forward broken. Let's take time to really process and talk about how we feel and how we're feeling. We're still in a pandemic. That's another thing that people have to understand. We're still in a pandemic. We're still worried about our health. I'm still worried about when I go see my grandmother. Is it really okay to see her, right? Is it really okay to hug her? Am I putting her in jeopardy? Those are all things that we're still dealing with. And we need to be able to have space to talk about them. We need to be able to have spaces to where we have the right supports so that we can navigate them. And right now, we are at an even greater deficit than we were before the pandemic started. So we need more counseling supports. We need more intentional scheduling with our master schedules. I even think we need to be flexible with, you know, days of school and think about different calendars of time off and all those different kind of things that allows our humanity to be taken care of while we're going through all of this. Great question.
I love how you acknowledge that the pandemic has had a serious impact on not only ourselves, but everyone among us, and that you're acknowledging that we do need to make these connections with other partnerships in order to get actual help. But speaking about trauma, so in 2019, as we know, DPS experienced an increase in gun violence, assault, and theft. So Mr. Jones and then Mr. Esserman, as parents of DPS graduates and current DPS students, what are your thoughts about the safety concerns within the district? And what is your plan to address those issues so that students and staff feel safe?
I think what you're going to find is you're going to hear Mr. Jones and I echo a lot of the pretty similar ideas, coming from some different lived experiences, but that we tend to agree on a lot of things. And I think that the key here, when we talk about safety and when we talk about, I know how traumatic some of that gun violence was going on immediately outside of DMLK prior to the pandemic, and the resulting in the clear backpacks and then the trying to keep people safe, but also the trauma of not knowing if you were safe going to school. As students and as families, what we want for our children primarily is for them to be safe going to school. Yes, we want them to learn. Yes, we want them to see people in front of them who look like them, who reflect their values. We want all of those things, and we want them prepared for their next steps. But first and primarily, they have to be safe. We also know that what causes most of that lack of safety are circumstances well outside of the school building. That when we have families experiencing housing insecurity and food insecurity and parents experiencing job insecurity, that increases the level of stress and that decreases the safety in our buildings. The social emotional supports and the trauma informed supports that Mr. Jones was just talking about in terms of what we put in place during the pandemic are also what address safety. And one of the key pieces that I go back to when we talk about safety is this, is that as a teacher, what you learn early on is that your best response to classroom misbehavior is prevention. And y'all know from being in a classroom, if you've got a teacher that creates clear expectations and guidelines and is really on and you know what's expected when you walk in that classroom, that there are likely fewer, if none, behavioral disruptions when you're in there. The same is true when we talk about safety, that we have to establish those expectations and those guidelines. And then we have to address the root causes of what's causing that violence in order to make sure that students and staff feel safe. That's my feeling on it.
Yeah, I remember couple things. I remember, I don't know if you young ladies were there, but I remember in our community, after the uptick in violence, we all gathered as a community out at the E.B. Garrett Dennis campus. And there were 200-300 folks that gathered, and there was December 2019. We were talking about what was going on. The mayor was there. We had Dr. Grayson was there. We had all of these folks who were there. And these young people got up. I was facilitating. These young people got up and they started to talk. And I want to tell you that I think that what happened and what continues to happen is young people get ignored. Right? Like young people come and tell you, hey, this is why, this is why, this is what we need, this is what we need, right? And then the adults go back to doing the adult programming. They go back to doing whatever their current grant or whatever is telling them to do, and the issue never gets solved. So I think the first thing when it comes to dealing with safety is we do have to listen to young people who are telling us what's going on, who are telling us what's being pushed on Snapchat, who are telling us what is being sold on Instagram, who are telling us, hey, right, these folks need help. We got to listen to our young people. And it's safe to tell. It's also having a trusted adult in the building that you can talk to, like you guys are all aware of. You've had those. And in some of our schools, our SROs were some of the trusted people. Right. And in some of our schools, the SROs were the folks that I know, Officer Henry and they were folks that students went and talked to. Officer Jones, folks went and talked to and were able to express, their concerns and were able to get the help that they needed. I agree with Mr. Esserman that being proactive with social emotional supports is a safety strategy, right? Making sure, as I say, we are dealing with the racism that has actually caused the structures and systems that would starve a community, that would cause people to be in places where they feel like the only answer is violence. We got to deal with that. And if we don't deal with that, then you're not really concerned about our kids going to safe schools. Lastly, my daughter's in 3rd grade at Marama. And the other day, Marama, woo, woo, Mustangs. She, the other day in 3rd grade, before she's going to class, she's like, Dad, tomorrow I have a lockdown. And the school, they're doing this new thing so they don't traumatize kids. They're trying to give them advance notice if they're doing drills at the elementary level. And she said, Dad, what is the lockdown? Right? And I'm not going to get emotional talking about it, but it hurt my heart to have to sit there with my 3rd grade daughter and explain to her what a lockdown was, why it was important for her to be as quiet as a mouse and to listen to her teacher when it was time for a lockdown. To Scott's point, there is no parent on this planet who wants to drop their son or daughter or child off and not be able to pick them up again. No parent on this planet, right? So we have to do both. We have to keep our schools safe, but we also have to keep them from becoming police states, right? I want my kids safe, but I don't want them getting tickets and going into the school to prison pipeline, right? So we got to figure out, how do we keep our schools safe and keep them from becoming police states, because we want our kids to come home. We want you guys to have futures. We want, you to annoy us and ask us for allowance and all that good stuff. So I think we got a lot of work to do, and I think it starts with listening to young people.
Yes, and of course, safety is pretty much like this general thing that we need in order to learn in our classrooms and in order to receive an education so that students are able to be successful. So, Mr. DeGuire, what is your plan to make sure that all of the changes within the district are centered around student achievement?
I think it's critical that we look carefully at what we define as student achievement. Right now, we're looking at student achievement as a measure of accomplishment on a standardized test. And I would argue that we need to rethink what we define as student achievement as much broader than that. There's enough research of late about how kids learn. It's telling us very clearly that every student, no matter where they're from, can and will achieve and can thrive based on who they are. It doesn't matter where they're coming from, as long as they're supported, encouraged, motivated, challenged, and related to in a positive way. Student achievement is not just about passing a test. It's about uncovering the strengths and skills that you come to school with, the passions that you have. So many of us have gotten caught up in the last 20 years with measuring student achievement on a narrow focus. The recent research is telling us that graduates from high school and juniors and seniors are telling us that that is not how they've learned to be ready for life. They've learned through community experiences, after school experiences. They learned through other kinds of opportunities beyond the narrow work that they've been doing. We've got to have internships, apprenticeships, exposure to trades. We've got to have young children exposing to the arts. Music, art, PE must be required and happening in every elementary school. We've got to make sure that kids have supports and the right kind of social and emotional conditions in their school to help them achieve. When I was principal at McMean Elementary, we had a variety of students from all different races and backgrounds, and we were able to support those students by relating to them first. Achievement happened because of our relationships that we established, the trust that we had with the families, and the way we developed community connections with those families. We did that for years, and we were honored because of the work that our teachers did. It's critical that student achievement is much broader than the way we're defining it. And we need to have systems in place, and we have to have programs that reflect the curriculum that you all have brought forward that needs to be expanded beyond social studies. It should be in science, technology, all the arts, and every other experiences, so that students can experience whatever achievement they can excel at, no matter who they are, wherever they come from. And those things have to be set in terms of policy, not just hoped for. So again, this is a real critical issue. We've got to transform how we're doing education. We've got to fund it and measure it differently.
It was really great to hear about how we need to hear from the students and be able to know what they need and know that that will affect them in the long run and like feeling like they will matter. I also wanted to ask the question to all of you guys in the order of Mr. Jones, Mr. Esserman, and then Mr. DeGuire. How do you guys plan to not only hear, but also listen and act to acknowledge and elevate student voices?
Yeah, so having been in this work in Denver for a long time, I feel like a dinosaur sometimes, but one of my greatest joys was to work, when I was at Manual High School, was to work with the Student Board of Education back in the day, and was very excited about that work, very excited about, I believe, and we take great credit for it, for establishing this kind of like revolutionary spirit, not only at Manual when I was there, but also with the students on the Student Board of Education. There are some of my young students who have graduated from college and they're in their careers now. And they're rebels, man. They're doing their thing. And I take great pride in the fact that we helped to spark the power that was already there. I think you cannot do school without, I used to tell my kids at Manual, I cannot do school without your voice. You are the majority of this building. No matter how many adults are here, you are the majority of this building. And I need to hear your voice every day. I need to hear your feedback on the lesson. Did it achieve what you thought it should achieve? Is the master schedule what you thought it should be? We need to welcome student voice everywhere. And it doesn't, there should be no place that we're afraid to have student voice, right? We need to, and that's what we did on the Student Board of Education. That's what I did with the leadership when I was at Manual, then ran Omar D. Blair Charter School. That's what we did. We made sure student voice was there. And then running the Northeast Denver Innovation Zone, I get to work with student leaders constantly, specifically at Northfield High School. And we elevate student voice. And we said, look, it doesn't get done without you. So for me, being an at-large person, I would have student councils that I would meet with on a regular basis. I would find out everybody's student council, student government, or student voice schedule and make it a part of my practice to regularly go and say, hey, part of my job as the board is to check in to see we're doing what we're supposed to be doing. And I'd regularly sit down with students and say, how are we doing? And I would listen to their feedback face to face, take that feedback back to my board colleagues and say, hey guys, this is what I'm hearing on the ground. Let's look at the data and see if it lines up with that. But definitely, you got to hear from the students.
Everywhere I've been, every classroom I've taught in has been about hearing, listening, acknowledging, and elevating student voices. When we did principal searches for school leaders at Manual High School, I insisted, much to people's downtown chagrin, that we have students representing each grade level on those interview committees, and that those students were given at equivalent voice to any adult in the room, and maybe even more voice because they were important. And not only those people serving on the committee, but also we then had a part of the interview process that was with another group of students. I did the same thing at Montclair Elementary when we searched for a principal. And when there were adults in the room who wanted to discount the student input, when we were making our decisions, I insisted that that not happen. And I'm going to continue doing that. And so my plan to hear and listen and act and acknowledge and elevate student voices is to, one, continue some of the work that the current board has done. I know that Dr. Olson has been involved with student voice and has prioritized that. I know that there was a student interview of our superintendent finalists that was weighted significantly. And I think it's important to continue that. And I think it's important, the only way I'm going to hear and listen to student voices is to be out in schools. That's the only way to do it. And that will be a priority for me starting day one, is getting out into more schools. I already go out to the schools. I volunteered at Manual. My daughter was a student there when I wasn't teaching. Students are the heart of what we do. And if we're not elevating those student voices, if we're not providing the platform, and if we're not listening and acting on, it's not going to happen. And I am committed 100% to doing that.
My daughter, as I said, is a counselor at DCIS Baker. This year has been an eye-opener for her. She's been tears several times as teachers have come back and students have come back to a traumatic experience. She represents my personal student voice because she's with students every day. I would recommend that we systematize and formalize a process for students across the district to not just have a voice to the board, and it can be followed very similarly as our CSCs work in every school. There should be a student voice from every high school and possibly even from every middle school that meets regularly and provides quarterly input to the board, directly to the board. But more importantly, we need to have a way for the students across this district to work together with each other. One of the problems we have is that we don't know each other's lives very well. We don't understand their concerns, their conditions, and the challenges that happen across this district. We need to have ways to our students from different schools, from JFK, from Manual, from Northfield, from South, from GW, to get together more regularly and understand the needs that students have. And that needs to be formalized and systematized so that there can be real student voice and student action about curriculum, instruction, and assessment, so that they're really part of the decision making and not just a group that might come together once in a while. I think we need to formalize the process and make it real.
Mr. DeGuire, I know that you mentioned that for students, including your daughter, that it's been a roller coaster coming back, especially from the pandemic and the trauma that came along with it. And with coming back, Mr. DeGuire first, and then Mr. Jones. I wanted to ask you guys, how will students be involved in the curriculum, in the decisions and commitments to make sure that those changes are which are really affecting the students will be best for them?
Yeah, as I said, I think we have to have a process in place for them to be involved. It can't be random or it can't be dependent on one principal or a few principals who want to take the time to support their students. There needs to be a system in place, and it can be formalized, as we talked about. The reality is, in coming back from the pandemic, I think we missed the boat in terms of budgeting. That's one of the critical concerns that I had. Every school was responsible for making sure that they had the mental health as well as the supports for nurses based on their own budgets. One of the problems with that is that we didn't provide it centrally. So we were 61 nurses short this year, which really is a concern in terms of the health and welfare of our students. We have counselors who are spread too thin. That could have been alleviated by realigning the monies that we had centrally. There's a lot of things that we could be doing differently to help support the needs of our students as a result of the pandemic. In the future, students know what their needs are. It's amazing how much they know. And I learn that every day, as I said, from my daughter. We need to make sure that there's a formal system, a process for them to give that voice about the curriculum that makes sense of them, that will engage them, and also the teaching learning process so that project-based learning and real meaningful experiences can happen for those students so that when they graduate, they have choices. It's not just about college. They've experienced what trades are like. They've experienced the arts more at every school, not just at some schools. And so again, I think we just have to make that system work in a way that honors the voice in a systematic way. And again, that work across the district.
Yeah, again, this is my norm. This is how we operate. I mean, going back to when we were at Manual, reopening Manual, when we were redesigning our experiential learning program, when we were working with the Student Board of Education, even as a dad, like my kids would tell you, like I just had to make some big career decisions myself, and I sat down with my 5 kids and said, "What do y'all think? Like, how are we moving as a family?" It is about who I am. I believe in the value of the people around me. I believe in the brilliance of my kids. Sometimes my teenage daughter Lily says the best things. I'm like, man, that's a good idea, right? And I rock with that thing, right? Sometimes it's my third grader Brooklyn, and she's like, "Dad, I think you should." And I'm like, "Oh, listen to that wisdom," right? And so I think we shortchange ourselves as adults if we think we know everything, right? That's the one thing I've learned as a parent. I learned that as an educator in the classroom from Savannah Madrid Andrews and Jordan Madrid Andrews, the two twins who always had an opinion in my student leadership class. And I was like, okay, all right. They know what they're talking about, right? Kyle Motley, Devontae Swain, these kids that were in my class, like they made me better, right? They made me better. As learning, I believe, is always a two-way process, right? It's not that I am the singular teacher and I'm the adult who knows everything. It's I get to be in a space with other human beings having an experience, and we all get to add value to each other. So I believe in that, whether I'm in the room with, guys like Scott and Mike, or if I'm in the room with, high school seniors or third graders, or the other day when I was doing ECE lunch, I can learn something from whoever I'm in the space with because I value their humanity. And I think at the core, that's what happens is people don't listen to young people because they don't think your humanity matters until you're a taxpayer or you're a voter, right? That's ridiculous, right? Your life matters because you have breath. Your life matters because right now you've got brilliance that is untapped. And so that's the job. If you want to be a great leader, you want to be a great adult, listen to young people. And I think to Mike's point about systematizing it, I think it should be the norm. Like it should be the norm. There should be student voice on our collaborative school committees, and there should be student voice on hiring committees. There should be student voice on budgeting committees. There should be student voice on curriculum committees. Everything that we do, we got to look in the room like, just like, so, and I'm going to stop after this. Equity is not you doing to me. Equity is rooted in a relationship with me so that then you are doing what I've asked you to do, what I need you to do at the time I need you to do it. That is equity. You can't say you're being equitable and you're not listening to my voice and you keep telling me, hey, eat those greens when it's broccoli. Come on now, right? So yeah, that's where we got to land there.
I definitely agree that equity is really important in general, and especially within the school systems. And I wanted to ask Mr. Esserman and then Mr. DeGuire, Do you guys realize that there are systems of inequality in DPS?
I'm not just aware of it. I'm aware of the ways in which my family benefits from it. I'm aware of what has to change in order to end those systems. I've seen those systems. I've done my best to dismantle those systems repeatedly, and think that as a board member, I have the best opportunity to dismantle those systems of inequality and to ensure that all students are getting what they need, that are recognized for their humanity and that are given their dignity, but that are also provided with all the things that we've talked about today in order to ensure that they're successful. The Black Panther parties and the Black Panther Party in the 1960s was led by Bobby Seale and Huey Newton, instituted free breakfast and free shoes program under that basic belief that our children can't learn if they don't have food in their bellies and they don't have shoes on their feet. And that continues today. This isn't something new, like Mr. Jones was talking about. This isn't anything new. I know those systems exist. I am committed to and responsible for dismantling those systems.
There are many systems of inequality in DPS. Unfortunately, that's a similar situation in many large cities across the country. Some of them come historically, as we've learned today, but they continue in terms of the resources that are available, as well as the hiring and the supervising practices that exist across the district. We do not understand the fact that we're not providing equal and supportive, equitable opportunities for kids across this district. There are too many schools that have unfair advantages and too many places where children are not given the opportunity to even have before and after school supports or additional resources within the school. We have inequities in terms of our buildings, in terms of our cooling systems, in terms of our staffing. There's so much inequities across our district and they need to be addressed. We have inequities in terms of the way we supervise some of our employees, the way we evaluate some of our employees, the way we hire and retain some of our teachers, and the way we actually recognize and celebrate our student achievements. We need to understand that every school is a great school and can be a great school if we honor the story that they bring and that their community helps support. And we need to stop messaging that one school is better than another, or that there's certain things that are, achieving higher, if in fact we get the resources to every school that they need in order to be successful. We've got to start doing that with the way we budget and the way we honor the work of our families. And we have to think about this whole issue of closing schools that's on the table right now. That's wrong that we're talking about closing or consolidating 19 schools when in fact those neighborhoods have no support for that. And we should not even have that as a resolution right now. We need to be supporting every school in our district by taking the monies that we do have and working with our state to increase the funding so that we have better opportunities for all kids and all families throughout the district.
Yeah, I'm gonna hit that inequity. I don't know if I get that, but I want to. If you're not in the room, what do they say? You're on the menu, right? So let's talk about the real inequity and the inequality of representation. We are a majority brown and black school district, and in so many rooms, they're not brown and black people making decisions, right? In so many spaces, there's still folks talking about us, right? Not saying, oh my goodness, look at this room. It still looks like the oppressive structure that we say we don't want to be. Oh my God, look at this conference table. It still looks like the oppressive conference table that we say we don't want to be. We have to acknowledge that the reason why some things remain the same is because the same voices are at the table. The same voices are in the HR hiring rooms. The same voices are leading, the policy discussions. The same voices are leading. You get what I'm saying? We have to ensure that if we really want to deal with the inequities, the inequalities, we have to also look at representation and say, why were we making curriculum decisions and there were no black folks in the curriculum discussion until No Justice, No Peace showed up, right? Like, those are things that we can't just sweep under the rug, right? And act like the structures and the systems are designed for our inclusion. because they are not designed for our inclusion. They are designed for our exclusion. And so it's important that we continue to press very heavily on the fact that we need to be included, not excluded.
I think that is really important for us to know that, or for us to know that there is representation and that we are able to realize and make awareness to the inequities within DPS. And I also wanted to ask in the same order, including Mr. Jones, what's your level of comfort when it comes to dismantling these oppressions?
I will say this, what is my comfort? I wake up every day having to deal with this. This is like, we have no choice but to be uncomfortable, right? We have no choice. James Baldwin said, like, it's just how we live. It's how we exist as Black people in America, as brown people in America. We have to deal with it. There are some people who have the comfort, the privilege of not having to deal with it. We don't have that. We have to deal with it or we don't survive. We have to deal with it or we don't thrive. And so I am very much okay with calling it out as it is. This is an education plantation that is not designed for Black and brown kids to be nothing but enslaved. I'm okay with saying that. But then I'm also okay with putting in the work to say, how do we change that? How do we do things differently? How do we quit trying to, what I call do appeasement cosmetics? Like, you know, let's put up some new paint. Let's put up some new banners. Let's put up, and nothing has changed. Okay, we got to quit falling for the okie doke. We got to quit falling for the cosmetic changes, and nothing has changed internally about the system. Nothing has, no mindset has changed, no heart set has changed, and the hands haven't changed. So, you know, every day, that's how we live. Every day, that's how we live. And so very, very, very comfortable, 100%. As one of my friends say, all 10 toes in. So let's make it happen.
I would say it's not about a level of comfort for me. It's about a level of responsibility. And it's about a level of commitment. And it's not about my comfort dismantling systems. It's about my life goal to dismantle systems of oppression, not just within DPS, but everywhere. That I live in a world that I see as not being just, and not being just to people I love and I care about and people who are part of my family. It is not about comfort for me. It is not about discomfort. It is about, if I have to make other white people uncomfortable to make this work happen, I'm going to. If this means that when the state is coming to close Manual High School, I'm going to insert myself in between the state and the school, I'm going to. If this means that when the board is coming to close Denver Discovery School, and I go and I listen and I contribute in ways that I can, and in ways that I am asked to by the Black community to contribute, I'm going to. Black people didn't create racism. White people did. White supremacy did. And it is my responsibility, and it is my commitment, and it is my lifelong goal to work with communities, because it is not about me. I am not savior. And it is essential that I'm in there to make sure that that happens. I'm about dismantling those systems. It is what I've done with my life. It is what I will continue doing on the board.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with the importance of addressing the oppression that has happened in Denver and across the country, especially in our large cities. I've had the opportunity to learn one heck of a lot in the last 8 to 9 years as I coach principals. And I've had the privilege of coaching principals who are leading schools, both in the Montbello area, as well as schools that are alternative high schools, if you will, for students who have certain needs that are not being met in the high school. This experience has broadened my understanding and knowledge like no one else. I am committed to changing how we do education, to realizing that our Black and brown students must be part of the solution. They're not the problem. We've been saying that students are the problem, that teachers are the problem. That's one of the current, I think, challenges right now. This is not just about teachers learning culture responsive education. It's about the system that is failing all of our students. especially in the way we're measuring and judging their achievements. And I'm committed 110% to changing this system so that every student can be honored for who they are and can be able to experience learning experiences that make sense to them and that honor their values and what they bring to the school setting. I owe a lot of the learning that I've had because of the work that I've done with the Righteous Rage Institute, the reading that I've done, and the coaching that I've actually also received from the principals that I've supported. And it's been a wonderful experience for me to know that this is the time, it's now, and we have to make these changes. And we have to use every resource we can to bring about the changes so that we don't have gaps that are supposedly happening for our Black and brown students with our white students, when in fact, they are able to achieve at the same rates if we redefine how we look at achievement.
I completely agree with everything that you all just said. And I just love how in all of your responses, you acknowledge things that we've already had to acknowledge and not only exist with, but also confronting right now that the DPS school system and the school system nationwide has been built to work against Black students like us, whether we're being activists or whether we're just trying to get an education. And I just really appreciate that you guys acknowledge that, because that's one of the main reasons me, Donnie, Alana, and Janelle started the podcast, was to confront a lot of the things that were affecting us as Black students. And it's also one of the things that led us to come up with the resolution, which I'm glad you guys mentioned earlier, because right now specifically I want to ask Mr. Esserman, and Mr. Jones regarding our No Justice, No Peace resolution that was passed in October of 2020 by the school board, the previous school board. What does the resolution mean to you, and what are you going to do to uphold it throughout your term?
It's a great question. So what the resolution means to me is that we have y'all as students who've stepped up, and I know that this was not easy to get this resolution passed. It's not like y'all showed up and were like, hey, we have this great idea, board. Why don't you pass this? No, it was repeated, and it was showing up, and it was calling, and it was emailing, and it took a momentous effort that it shouldn't have had to have taken. It should have been pretty simple. So what it means to me is that we have the opportunity to utilize that resolution as a jumping off point to ensure that our curricula reflects our students. That what our students are learning is not what has traditionally been taught in schools, but rather reflects, for instance, the Black experience in America. If we're not teaching that, we aren't just hurting Black students, we're hurting white students. White students need to learn that also. They need to know where we're coming from and what the history, the true history of this country is. And that's what the resolution provides us the opportunity to do. It also isn't, to me, just about upholding it throughout my term. It's about expanding on it. It's about taking it next steps. It's about how do we take this and ensure that it's going on throughout the curriculum, that it's going on in our math and our science classroom, that it's going on in our arts education, that it's going on with our special service providers, our speech and language pathologists, with our mental health professionals in the building. What I'm going to do to uphold it throughout this term is to, one, as we've talked about before, continue engaging in conversation with active students like yourselves, but also the students whose voices aren't always heard. It means when I go out to schools and I'm engaging in those conversations, it's about asking questions about, do you feel like your curriculum better reflects you than it did a year ago? And if not, why? And why isn't this being implemented? Far too often what happens at the board level, in particular in Denver public schools, is that there are resolutions and there are mandates and they aren't followed through on. The board votes to approve innovation schools and then doesn't ensure that they have the resources that they need in order to be able to fulfill that vision that they've created. I'm committed to making sure that that happens. I'm committed to making sure those voices continue to be heard. And I'm making sure that voices in the future don't have to fight the way that you had to fight. That to me is unacceptable.
I think critical, if you read the resolution, you will know that you all went out of your way to actually give us the roadmap for implementation, right? You talked about developing consistent practices and curriculum revision. You talked to us about feedback loops. You talked to us about internal and external curriculum audits. You talked to us about, fundamentally changing the behavior of teaching by having professional teaching groups where teachers could get together and do these things. You laid all that out in the resolution. It's a beautiful thing, right? It's not only this needs to change, but here's the plan on how you need to change it. We have to make sure that that plan is executed. We have to make sure through our inspection, through our encouragement, through the raising of our voices, that the steps outlined in the resolution are actually taken. And we all understand where we're at right now as a district. We all understand the challenges of COVID, but what we cannot do is scapegoat COVID as to why we're not doing the things that we can be doing. And so we want to make sure that we execute what you guys have put out there. I also believe that we need to, as Dr. Mike had said earlier, is that this is not just about, I need everybody to hear it too, that this is not just about Black history, right? It's about Black presence in all of the various classrooms and the various contents in the humanities, in the arts, in the sciences, right? This was just Black History 365 even teaches you that as you get into it, you find about our brilliance in the sciences, you find about our brilliance in the arts. And so it shows you how you can take that one book that you guys have been working with, and you can infuse that and use it as instructional threads throughout every course in a building, right? So this is not just limited to the history department. This is not just limited to social studies. This is a tool that should be infused everywhere we're teaching. And so my job is to make sure that that's happening. My job is to make sure that we are evaluating the commitments that we've made as a board when we pass a resolution. We agreed to these steps as well. So why aren't these steps happening? And those are the questions we'd ask the superintendent. Those are the questions we'd ask the staff. And then we'd ask them, give us a plan for when these things are going to happen so we can then set some benchmarks and we can follow up at X date. So that's how we get it done.
We've honestly enjoyed learning so much about each of you during this interview, especially how everything is centered around student voice. But before we end, we would love to hear a 20-second elevator speech on why you should be on the DPS school board.
I've had the experience of leading 5 schools in Denver and the metro area. I am a knowledgeable coach with many principals. I understand what we need to do, and I know that I am ready to take that action and get it done. I have that readiness to do it, and I have a passion and commitment to make sure that we change and transform education so that all students can succeed.
I'll take that next. I am us, right? I am my neighborhood. I am Denver. I've grown up here. My family's grown up here. And I will represent us well on the school board because I know our struggle. And I also know our brilliance. And I also know the world that we all hope for. And I know it's possible. Working with leaders at Manual, Omar D. Blair Charter School, with the 6 schools in my innovation zone, and with so many schools through the Student Board of Education, I know what we can get done. And so I'm looking forward to it. And I can't wait to represent you all on the DPS Board of Education. Thank you for this privilege.
I'm going to tell you that it's about being an educator, and it's about being a teacher, and it's about having devoted my life to the best interests of students and the best interests of kids and the best interests of our communities. And that's the work that I've done, and that's the work that I'll continue doing on the board. And that is why I'm the guy.
Thank you guys so much, Mr. Jones, Mr. DeGuire, and Mr. Esserman. We appreciated your guys' time so much, and we loved hearing your guys' perspectives. It was really good talking to you. And thank you so much for being on our podcast today.
Thank you. I'm looking for my new DMLK gear because I don't have the new logo yet. So I'll be at the school. So
thank you. And thank you for the work that you do, not just today, but have continued doing. It's impressive. And I know how hard y'all are working at it. I appreciate you.
On today's episode, we discussed what motivates our candidates to run for their seats on the board, what they want to bring to DPS, and their commitment to the education of DPS students. To our board members, regardless of the outcomes of November 2nd, continue doing the work because students' lives literally depend on it. There are so many other students and student organizations within DPS that want and deserve to be heard, and you are one of the main people who should be in our audience and bring their change into the district. Work to confront the inequities happening in your communities and create a space where student voice is elevated and the center of all decisions being made. You cannot effectively serve your students and schools if you're not willing to hear what they have to say.
Stay tuned for our next episode with school board candidates Dr. Jose Silva, Jane Shirley, and Jean Fashak.
You can follow us on our Facebook page, No Justice, No Peace, The Take. Email us at kjkpthetake@gmail.com. Make sure to also subscribe to our YouTube channel, No Justice, No Peace, The Take, and make sure to give us your feedback through our social media.
You can say that I'm clearly comfortable up in my own skin. This one's for the melanin. This one's for the melanin. Everyone who wants the elements of the melanin. Stand up, put your fist in the air if you're feeling the anthem.
Now ain't nobody being biased, I'm just stating facts. When I think about greatness, it goes back to black. I think about all the pain our people went through. The history was wiped out. Our people built America, the monuments, the White House. Rarely got the credit, man, the names was never mentioned. Invented electric railways, home security systems. It's heated in the summer, as hot as it may be. You can think of black man.